Bluegrass Jamalong is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jamalong, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jamalong. My guest on the podcast this week is Joe K Walsh, and if you heard the interview I did a while ago with Darol Anger, you'll have heard a bit about Joe because we chatted about the Mr. Sun Plays Duke Ellington's Nutcracker album, and Joe was a big part of that project with Darol and the Mr. Sun guys, but he is here this week to talk about his new record, Trust and Love, and also his previous record, If Not Now Who, because it felt very much like they were connected, and so I wanted to have a conversation that included both of those. I really enjoyed this one. Sometimes when we talk about a new record, it's very much about the record and the songs and the people and the process and all of that, and we talk about that a bit, but there's much sort of wider ranging conversation about like some of the bigger stuff and some of Joe's sort of thought processes and philosophies and ideas, and just a really interesting deep conversation about the reasons for making music. The kind of conversation I really enjoy. Felt really sort of thoughtful, and it was a real joy, this one. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you do too. Just before we start the interviews, wanted to remind you that Bluegrass Jamalong is a listener-supported podcast. If you want to support Bluegrass Jamalong, you can do so for the tiny amount of 99 cents a month by just becoming a subscriber at Apple Podcasts. It helps keep the content going, helps me keep doing this, and is very much appreciated. And if you don't want to do that, that's also absolutely fine. But please do share these episodes if you enjoy them, and help spread the word, because that also makes a huge difference. But that is it. All the usual stuff. Go to bluegrassjamalong.com if you want to see a big list of all the interviews. You can filter them by subject. You can see all the mandolin stuff, anything that's Tony Rice related, interviews with fiddle players. Just scroll through the list and find something interesting. They are all on there. But that is it. This is my conversation with Joe K Walsh. Joe, welcome to Bluegrass Jamalong. It's great to have you here.
A pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
I've been listening to your last two records, and like normally somebody comes on to talk about their new record and we talk about their new record, and we will definitely be doing that. But it feels very much like your last two records are kind of joined together in some form, and so it'd be really interesting to have a conversation about both, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
So the records we're talking about a record called Trust and Love, and we're also talking about a record called If Not Now Who, which preceded it, and both of them have a kind of a sort of space about them, a kind of calm and a quiet about them, and it's very, for want of a better phrase, conversational music. And it feels like, from the things I've seen and the things I've heard you say, that it started with If Not Now Who, and you've kind of built on that with the new record. Is that fair to say?
I think that's true. I mean, I think you can see like values that have been with me for the whole time, for better or for worse. We can't get away from those. But absolutely, conversational is the word, or space is the other word that I really felt like kind of gave me a target in a sense of what I was trying to do with other people. Yeah,
and because there's other records, there's other records you've done that are instrumental string band music and have, occupy a similar sort of space, but these two feel a bit different to me.
Yeah, well, I guess I just, you keep trying to get closer and closer to the thing that you believe is out there and hope is out there, and you keep taking if you're lucky, you get to keep trying for those sorts of things. And to me, the thing that I wanted to do was a group improvising record within the bluegrass context, where it's less about like, here's what you're doing, here's what I'm doing, and trying to have a sense of let's see what happens, and we're less prescribed about what needs to happen in every moment, and we're all sort of freely encouraged to do whatever occurs to you in the moment in response to each other.
I was going to ask about that, because it feels like, in the catalogue of instrumental string band and adjacent stuff that is out there, There's lots of ways of approaching that. You can basically write an original fiddle tune and treat it like a fiddle tune, or you can do a kind of Grisman thing where stuff is stretched out over longer periods, and stuff is like, I spoke to Darol Anger recently about the Grisman Quintet, and he was talking about these arrangements of David's that he calls symphonic, where it's not 5 instruments playing all the time, stuff comes in and out, and it's much more. There's a lot of ways of going about that. Do you have a sort of starting point with that? Like, is there an element of arrangement?
Hopefully there's enough, right? And I think it's not lost on me that if you're trying to address the premise of can instrumental bluegrass music, instrumental acoustic music on these instruments, if that's supposed to be concert music, if it's supposed to justify attention in that way, it's not lost on me that most people solve that problem by saying this. Let's be heavily arranged, even micro arranged, right? And I think in our current moment, Hawktail does such a beautiful job of arguing for that approach. Mm-hmm. Like that's a beautiful, fully realized, beautiful music, and it's also supporting that argument. That said, the stuff that I find myself listening to is about people listening to each other and trying to arrive in that moment without a preconceived notion of what's going to happen. And I believe that sound hasn't been fully explored in the bluegrass string band context, I think.
I mean, it does lend itself to, you end up with records that are, I mean, all records are this, but they're kind of snapshots of who you were and where you were on the day you recorded that tune, and a different version of it might be, it's not, you're not sort of, because, and it's a fascinating thing about making records is a record is seen often, is consumed as a definitive statement. Mm. And, I like, for example, I love the first Counting Crows record, and I played that to death. And I saw them on the tour for that, and Adam Duritz is fast and loose with the melodies. To the point where, there's a tune, because he decided on the record to kind of be a little bit more first chorus, this is a tune. Or you see him live, and he's like, I'm just going to do what I like here. And it's quite an exciting thing, because it means you could see the same band 3 nights in a row and get a totally different set.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what a lot of us, we come to a crossroads. Is that feeling and that possibility more important, or is always presenting a polished image more important? And to me, the thing that gives me life is, that conversational aspect with other musicians, and being in the moment and being present in that way where I don't have my canned lick waiting for when they're done. I'm present, and I'm saying what I'm going to play is going to be in direct response to what you're playing. And to me, that's the most interesting way to be as a musician.
It's funny. I think I've said this on the podcast before. I'm sure I have, but I'm fascinated by this idea of music as a conversation, because, it took me a long time to work out that when you're having a spoken conversation with somebody, like I used to think it was you'd sit and you were telling each other things you thought. And I've realized that a conversation is my opportunity to work out what I think, not my chance to deliver what I think. And some things I'm saying because I've thought about them, but you try things out and you see how they sound, and you respond to something somebody else says, and you come away from it with a clearer sense of what you think, but you don't necessarily have all the answers in the moment.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like in this context, what we're doing here, if I came in with some, choice sound bites, I really feel like I'd be shoehorning them in. And I don't think I'd be doing you a service. I think I'd be a little bit like just trying to keep my narrative here, and it kind of feels a little bit less present to me. Like that's what, if you think about quoting movies as part of a conversation, that always felt like, okay, fine, you might get a punchline out of it, but it really feels like we've stepped out of the conversation. And I feel like there's a parallel with music where once I start leaning on some cliches, it's like, okay, it's cool. And there's a reason to play it, and they work, but it doesn't feel as present as I hope to be with the musicians I'm there with.
We'll be right back with you just after this. The long-awaited Hill Country series from Collins Guitars represents a new voice in their acoustic lineup. Rooted deep in the bluegrass world, these new Dreadnought and OM models feature a strong fundamental tone with a dry, warm and woody character that's sure to catch the attention of players who hold the vintage instruments of the 30s in their highest regard. Watch world-class pickers Jake Workman, Kenny Smith and Bob Minner perform with new Hill Country instruments on the Collins Guitars YouTube channel, and learn more at collinsguitars.com. And each sort of style of music, to a greater or lesser extent, has a kind of vocabulary, doesn't it? And a kind of stylistic, it has licks, or, like you listen to heavy metal and there are certain things the guitarists all do in a solo, and there's certain ways of doing a solo. You can do the wah-wah kind of Hendrixy thing with a lot, and lots of guitarists just do that. And it can be really, really cool, but it can be difficult sometimes to move away from those things that are just under your fingers and live in your ears because you've heard them so many times, can't it?
I think that's true. And I mean, I think it can be easy to say, I know this works and I know how to do it, so that's what's going to happen. I think there's also a lot of beautiful examples. I mean, countless examples of the people we love and listen to who take that and say, how can I be creative with that? How can I move this over a beat? Can I add a note? Can I expand or contract and that kind of thing? That's a beautiful way to have a relationship with tradition that isn't just about, replicating.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about Trust and Love is the use of pedal steel on it.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it's pedal steel and like it's only nominally a string band situation. It's not we're not trying to tick all the boxes, but the role it plays is not necessarily the role a steel guitar would play on a country record or like an Americana album. It's not either all just pads or like crisp, clean, fast solos. There's a much more textural middle ground going on there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think you're totally right. To me, I didn't set out to be, let's have a pedal steel because that's the sound. What it felt like it was, let's find an opportunity to play with Rich Hinman because I think he's got the beautiful sensibility and he's someone who knows how to play conversationally and is comfortable with that, because it's not a comfortable thing for everybody to just go into a room and be vulnerable in that way.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because the two records have different personnel, and so that's an interesting thing to hear, that it's like more a collection of people than it is a choice in terms of instrumentation.
Absolutely. I mean, so I went to Berkeley, and when I was coming out of Berkeley almost 20 years ago, I felt like I had the mindset, like, here's a string band. Like, the people I listened to, they had a banjo and a fiddle and a guitar, and that's what you need, right? And where I live, it's not always easy to find a really fantastic banjo player or a fantastic improvising fiddle player. And eventually I realized that it's people connecting with people whose musical sensibilities and personalities we connect on is more important than finding the perfect instrument that fits this preconceived notion of take, for example, the flecktones. That's a beautiful example of just the coinciding musical values that play off and build upon each other.
Yeah, and just like, talking to Sierra Hull about her current touring band, and it has drums in, and she's not, like she said, hands up, I'm not really a big fan of drums in bluegrass music, but this guy's amazing, and I wanted to find a way to play with him and see if I could shape what I do a bit better to how he plays, and how he can shape what he does to how I play. And
yeah,
and I think that, that kind of, have we got these 5 instruments ticked off, that kind of, in that conversation of bluegrass and adjacent, there is more adjacent than there is bluegrass these days. It's like a beautiful old house with an extension that's 10 times the size of the house. You know what I mean? That's
really funny. I imagine you're right. Although there's such a, like, I always feel like you just go anywhere in the country and you're like, oh, there's a lot more bluegrass going on than I sometimes am aware of. But I totally know what you mean. There's a lot of expansion going on.
And it's exciting because you can hear people play kind of great straight ahead bluegrass, and people will still do it, and people will always do it, and it will always be an exciting thing when it's done well. There's just so much room to explore other stuff, and there's also that sense of, which is a rich tradition in the instrumental string band kind of world, of just exploring the harmony a bit more, extending some chords, and adding some sevenths in and some ninths, and there's that also takes things to a slightly different space, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, to me, the stuff that like got me fired up about playing the mandolin was Darol and Dog, and stuff that was really about synthesizing, all the experiences of your life into one music and hoping that it's a coherent presentation, and not about saying, I'll reject the fact that I listened to Django when I was a teenager, or I'll ignore all this other stuff. I think there's a way to bring it all together. At least that's sort of the guiding statement for Mr. Sun and a lot of the bands that I've ended up playing with.
And I think it's always been the way, you listen to Earl Scruggs and there's licks that he's clearly got from, like,
100%. Totally. It's
horn
been the
players.
start from the beginning. It was always about like, cool, here, let's bring in this, and here's this sound from somewhere else. And to me, the idea that you arrive at a sacred thing, and then it should never be twisted, or there's no room for change. I think that's an idea I have a hard time with.
Yeah, there's just so many examples of hearing people bringing things in, and so this kind of conversational sensibility that you kind of frames this in some. Was that is that something you'd heard in other music and thought? Because you just said there's something you hadn't heard fully expressed in the sort of string band space yet. Is it something that exists in a more fully fleshed out way in other genres?
I think the people who do it well are people who all listen to jazz a lot, and the thing that I am, another way of saying what I was trying to do with this record is have that ensemble sensibility that you'll find in jazz music, where we're all on our toes and just making decisions in the moment, but without having to have jazz harmony. Because I think that's a beautiful thing, and obviously I love jazz, and I love exploring other harmony, but I think that ensemble interplay that's so integral to jazz can also be beautiful in this context, even if you don't have to play over complex changes.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? At what point, like the instrument, if something is played mostly on string instruments, it's unlikely to be seen as jazz by people. And I mean, not that it matters where something lies on that continuum, and stuff's played with horns and drums and whatever, it's going to be seen more as jazz. But there is also there's probably a harmonic tipping point where something becomes jazz because of the kind of how far the harmonies extend. It's really, it's one of the things people talk about with the kind of, because a lot of bluegrass players like improvising on swing tunes, for example. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people have always done it, but there's something about a relatively simple set of chord changes that people can get very quickly if they don't know it.
Totally. And I think that a key distinction is, like, in the bluegrass world, I think we're often, this is not rigid and inflexible, but a lot of times we can assume these, identities of what you're supposed to be doing in a given moment. Like, okay, cool, I play the mandolin, I chop 2 and 4 and all the time, right? Or I play the guitar, so I'm going to play a low note on beats 1 and beats 3, and I'm play some portion of an arpeggio on the other beats, right? And that's cool, but I think sometimes we can relax into that and we can miss some other opportunities. And I think it's interesting if that's not the given, like not the assumed premise in every situation, what's possible is interesting to me.
So are you the kind of writer who, like, just writes every day and keeps the bits you like? Or are you the kind of person who, I can see you. The people listening to this can't see you nodding, but I can.
That's right. I mean, I really believe writing is a numbers game, and writing and then editing, and definitely trying to write every day, not waiting for the inspiration, chasing it down, and then being having no hesitation, being harshly, self-critical in my evaluations of what's working and what's not.
And when you're writing, are you thinking about whether a tune is suitable for the conversational side of things at all, or are you just writing things that you like the sound of and you worry about all that later?
There must be people who can write with a purpose, but it's not me. To me, like I even starting out, like when I was trying to be more in the straight ahead bluegrass world, I would try and write tunes, and for a while it was just apparent, like, this doesn't sound like something that Steffi would play, or this doesn't sound like something that Sam Bush would write. And it took me a while to realize that was a positive, right? It's at first it was just like, I only saw that as cool, I'm just not achieving the goal here. But if you come back to revisit some of these ideas and try and hear it with fresh ears, then maybe that's the best thing that I could have done. And that's a kind of a long way of saying, I don't think I can write with a purpose. I think I'm just writing all the time. And then as projects arise that suggest maybe more of a fiddle tune thing or more of a quieter thing, hopefully I have things in the that's already been written.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's that thing of, like in music, but also in life. Like when you were a kid, you sort of worry about the things that make you different from other people and see them as some sort of weakness. Or as you get older, you go, no, that's just me. That's who I am. Like that's, and as a musician, you realize the things that don't quite sound like everybody else. Like that's your voice coming out.
Totally. Yeah.
And like, but the temptation at first is to sort of squash it because it doesn't sound like the things you listen to.
Absolutely. And the, like, it's so apparent once you have that attitude and can see that in a positive, like Sam Bush doesn't sound at all like, Monroe. He certainly has an influence and done his homework, of course. Sam Bush doesn't sound like that. Reichman doesn't sound like Sam Bush. Thiele doesn't sound, it's like everybody sounds so distinctly themselves, and that's for the better. And just took me a little while to realize.
And if not now, who sort of, I'd quite like to talk about that as a title because that's really interesting. Like, there's obviously a play on words there, but it feels like that ties in a little bit to what we're just talking about. Like the who element of that is,
Yeah, I just felt like it sort of gently suggested the attitude, which is like, if you have, to me, like these records are about, like, if I think something should be out there and I find myself complaining or grousing about the lack of, let's say, for example, I found myself saying, why isn't there a quiet instrumental mandolin record that is making the argument for something that I think it could be really profoundly beautiful? If I find myself complaining about that for a few years in a row, I should just shut up or try and make an offering and at least see if I can't help attempt that. And so to me, that's what that title meant to me, is like, shut up, dude, or do it. And don't wait for somebody else to do this thing that maybe you can.
And that's interesting, that sort of yearning for a quieter record. Like where did that come? How did that sort of come about as a sort of starting point?
I don't know if other musicians have said this on this podcast, but at some point I realized, like, is the music that I'm making, how close is it to the music that I listen to? And if there's a dissonance, like if there's some distance between the two, why shouldn't it be closer to the stuff that I listen to? I think that's a reasonable premise. And for a long time, the stuff that I listened to the most was Bill Frisell and Martin Hayes, and certainly Dog and Bluegrass. But as much in the mix was that quiet stuff, like the understated records, with especially like the Bill Frisell records with as a duet with Ron Miles was beautiful, and some of these like the Keith Jarrett and Charlie Hayden record Jasmine, they're just like really beautiful records where I can't explain why you can have a 9-minute track that sustains my interest with just the two people and they're just playing the changes. But it does. And I felt like there hasn't been too many attempts at that in the mandolin world. Certainly Peter Ostrushko, who some of your listeners will know, was a beautiful example of playing slow stuff on the mandolin and not apologizing for it and really doing a beautiful job. And now Andrew Marlin does a great job of it as well. And I think it's a nice time to be alive as a mandolin fan, because the spectrum of what's possible and what's working is expanding to include that.
Yeah, I very much feel that way about Eric Sky's guitar playing, just like space and breath, and and it's because there's also a bravery about it, because there's nowhere to hide. Like your tone has to be good, like your intent has to be. It just, you are front and center out there, note by note.
Totally.
But it's like, and they're different approaches. It's like you listen to kind of Miles Davis taking his time, and you can almost hear the choices being made. And then you listen to John Coltrane, who's maybe chosen a scale rather than a note, and he's giving you these sheets of sound and whatever. And they're both equally exciting. But they're, there's something beautiful about the sort of space and like if somebody plays with space and that kind of tone, just the intent behind it can almost hit you harder than the intent you get from a really fast, shreddy kind of moment.
Yeah, and I think both are great. And I'm not going to say that I don't think fast is is exciting, and I work on that and I love it as well. But I do think like leaving the quiet and the understated on the table is a missed opportunity, I think, for the mandolin world.
And I find it fascinating that kind of coming from a point of quiet and the mandolin, you end up with a record with drums on it. It's like probably the quietest record. Like, obviously, if not now, Who has drums on a little bit of it, and Trust and Love has drums on more of it. But it's interesting.
I think it is. I think it's actually I'd be curious to hear what Sierra says about this, but I think that having a drummer there changes what you feel is necessary. And the same is actually true with having a pedal steel. So there's usually a note ringing most of the time through there. And what that does for me is it makes me feel less compelled to just, I have to say something here. Something needs to be happening. There's something that is happening, and it buys you some, patience and grace in the moment. And I think the same is true with drums.
Yes. And it's a couple of things about that. One is Sierra said that, bluegrass is obviously really forward-leaning music, and drum-led stuff tends to be more on the back of the beat. And so there's that for a start. There's that that allows you a little bit more space if your head's not in front of your feet all the time. There's a bit more. But there's also something interesting about that pedal steel does exactly, is often used in this fashion. And drums can do the same, because a string band is used to just kind of having this constant churn. And mandolin particularly, you're just kind of, your right hand is always in motion a lot of the time.
Right.
But both the drums on this record and the pedal steel, it's a little bit like, as I was listening to it, and this might not make any sense, but as I listen, it's almost like you've got this dish of a few elements, and then this thing that is a sauce that brings them all together. And it allows those things, it sort of fills in some of the gaps, if you know what I mean. And there's something musically really interesting about that. Totally,
yeah. And I do think it's like, that's what happened that day. And you earlier referenced like the definitive version, and if I could, it's very healthy for me to move as far away from that idea as possible and say, here's what happened with the collective moods of these 5 people in this room on that day. And that's a beautiful thing. And it doesn't have to be the last version of this. And maybe it'll reappear somewhere else with other people on a different day when we're feeling differently. And that'll be cool too.
Was it in any way kind of a reaction to having done the Mr. Sun Duke Ellington record, which was so arranged and so kind of intentionally kind of, the notes are all where they're supposed to be?
That's right. Maybe so. Yeah, that certainly was more structured than anything I think most of us had done. Maybe Darol had done more structured stuff with Turtle Island, I bet. But for the rest of us, I think that was even like, and it was beautiful music, and we really loved it, and I loved playing it with those folks. But then at the end of like 18 gigs in a row, you're like, cool, let's play something that doesn't have as much preconceived structure, and that was really refreshing.
Yeah, I talked to Darol about that record, and he said something I really loved. He said, it's one of the things Joe says, okay, well, next time we have a chance to do something like this, let's not. And it made me laugh, because it's such a beautiful record, and but I just get a sense of what a huge amount of work it was.
I think Darol knew, and the rest of us didn't, and it was a tremendous amount of work. But I'm glad we did it, and I feel like, whenever I read a novel or learn about somebody writing a play, you're like, yeah, that's what I should be doing. Large projects and putting that much thought into something. And I feel proud that we did it with that. But also, again, referencing Bill Frisell or someone who like that, you're like, stuff that doesn't have to be fully conceived in that way with a grand vision can also be really, really beautiful. And I'm drawn to that in a big way.
And were the records recorded in the same studio as each other?
No. One of them I set up in a barn in Maine. I can never remember the name of the space, but and then the second one was the more recent one was made in the bass player's attic in Boston.
Because there's something about I'm interested in kind of, because it's it's almost like a selection of people before it's like anything else. Was there a particular person that started with? There's a group. How did you go about assembling that group of people? Because I know, because the second part of that was just being curious about how much time you spent before going into the studio to do things like that.
Yeah, well, to me, John Mailander is a really beautiful person for this kind of music. Darol is as well, of course. Like John, a lot of people who are beautiful at doing that in this current moment are former students of Darol. So there's a lot of influence in that. To me, just knowing here's a day we played tunes together, and you can really hear that, feel that sort of conversational, listening, reacting approach. You just file that away, and that was true with John, and it's certainly true with. I play a lot with Zach Hickman actually in a band called the Mike Block Trio. So I know his playing, and I just had a sense that going off down this dimension, which sort of has aspects of jazz, and his background is big in jazz, but it's not going to be jazz. I think I just had this strong sense he was going to be the perfect guy for that, and I feel like that's true.
It's interesting that Zach's probably better known to people outside of the bluegrass world as being Josh Ritter's bass player and
right,
kind of musical director, I guess. And
right.
But was he not? I might have misremembered this, but I'm sure Critter said that he was in a band with Zach at Oberlin, like a kind of more string band kind of.
That's right, and I think he was sort of before the Dusters were the Dusters. He was in the band that sort of led into the Dusters, or I think it might have been called Stable Horse.
Yes, that's how I remember it. Yeah, from what Chris said. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and it's a very there's an interesting thing about a bass player being able to play jazz and play bluegrass, because they're very different sort of roles, aren't they? Or can be, certainly.
I think that's right. Yeah, I mean, there's always this conversation sort of reminds me of like talking with Michael Daves, who is an amazing at doing both, and is also good at siloing, right? He can, when he's playing bluegrass, you don't hear a hint of the jazz there, and when he's fantastic at playing jazz too. It's amazing to me the idea of turning it on in one section and then turning it off for this other thing. I think he alluded to the idea of like that might be a strange thing, like, you know, I think of like Grant always sounding exactly like himself, and, you know what I mean, and he's not turning off all this harmonic complexity that's a beautiful part of his personality when he plays on a bluegrass tune, and vice versa.
I guess the drums all comes into that as well, because if somebody is there essentially keeping time, then nobody else needs to, you know.
Absolutely.
Because in a bluegrass setting, everybody is constantly keeping time. That's sort of everybody's job to some extent.
Right.
And must be something really freeing about that. How do you... I'm still fascinated by this idea of drums on a really quiet record. And I don't particularly know. It's Dave Brophy, isn't it, on Trust and Love?
Yeah.
And I don't know him particularly as a drummer. Does he usually play in pretty quiet settings?
You know, I think he does pop stuff, and I think he does other stuff. The context I got to know him in was that bass player Zach puts together maybe a 13 or 15 piece band to play unamplified for a week at Club Passim.
Oh, wow.
And I sat next to him for a week, and I think there's a danger if you're playing an acoustic instrument next to a drummer and you literally don't have a microphone and you're in a room with 90 people. You could easily be drowned out by that drummer, and it said a lot. To me, it was really memorable that he knew how to play to the music, and that made everybody else also shine, which I don't think is that easy.
No, I mean, there's a really interesting sort of, I don't want to call it a trend necessarily, but thread of drums through string band adjacent kind of stuff. When you listen to somebody like Sarah Jarosz or Eva O'Donovan, and there's often quite a quiet kit, often played with like felt mallets, or there's kind of something on the skins, and it's a little bit brought down, and can become much more percussive and much more kind of melodic in a way that I find fascinating as a kind of former recovering drummer. Just hearing people play those kinds of textures, I find really interesting.
Yeah, totally. I think it's nice that people are experimenting. To me, I just like to, not everything, speaking to my own catalog, I don't think everything has always worked, but I just like the idea that, we're going to try things and taking risks. To me, that if I'm not going to take a risk, I don't think that I'm in the right line of work.
Well, and with that, kind of in the context of going into the studio to record these tunes, were there some that when you got there you found they just didn't work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's maybe 3 or 4 that and it's just impossible to tell. If there's 3 or 4 that I thought, yeah, this will definitely work, and then 40 minutes in, you're like, cool, let's move on. This is not happening. It's just, it could be it's a bad tune, and that's always a possibility, and it could just be we're just not in the right emotional space that day.
And it may be, I guess, that at some other point, another combination of musicians, somebody just brings something out of it that wasn't there that time. I guess that's one of the other things is when you approach something from that point of view, it gives you the opportunity to re-record tunes with different people. Because I think there's this strange thing, and I think I can see how we got there, but the idea is that everything has to always be new stuff. And everything always has to be, you need 12 new tunes for this record and then 12 new tunes for the next record. And there's something really interesting about hearing people revisit their stuff, either live or like later in their career in different ways. Yeah.
I think new experiences I value, right? And that's what makes it interesting to listen to improvising music for me, is feeling like I'm having a specific experience that's unique to that day or that people. But that doesn't mean new tunes. I think you're totally right. Like, revisiting these things in another context, another setting with other people, would be interesting to me.
And does that happen when you put these records out? Do you get to tour for them? And if you do you get to tour with the people who made them?
I'll do a few gigs this fall with almost exactly the lineup. Mylander is going to be on the road with Bruce Hornsby that weekend. But mostly no, because it's, Zach and Rich are on the road with Josh Ritter and various other rock stars. But that's okay. I feel like these tunes take life together in duo gigs with Grant, or I've been playing a lot of duo gigs with Matt Flinner, and they sound different, but they also work. And it's cool to figure out how to make, or which of them work and how to make them work in that setting.
And I mean, it's really interesting. I think it's part of what is very interesting about this world, the kind of modern string band world, is that there are very few kind of mortgage covering paying gigs in it. Like, unless you play for Billy Strings or you're in Del McCoury's band, or, I was going to say Molly Tuttle's band, but she's just changed her band. So, that pretty much everybody, even a band that are successful like Punch Brothers, all have other projects on the go, and it's people crop up on each other's records, and it makes you still need to look at the sleeve notes rather than just listen on the streaming. You still want the physical product, and you want to know who's on what. I think it's part of what keeps it really rich and really interesting.
I think so. I totally agree. I used to play with Grant, and I used to tour with Danny Barnes, a banjo player, and he would. I can't tell if it was with how much earnestness he would say, but he would talk about the blessings of obscurity, and sort of like what's possible if you're not worried about sustaining interest in a certain spotlight or something like that. I'm paraphrasing now, but I think that's true. There's a lot of interesting things that are happening and I'm glad they are, and they may not be happening with if you felt like the pressure of millions gazing on as you release your record.
Well, it's funny. I'd started doing this podcast, and I'd sort of thought, it'd be great if this podcast made a bit of money, and I got, I could like do this instead of my job, or like do it part of the time instead of my job, or whatever. And I'm actually so thankful that my job is separate from this, and that I'm kind of. And it's not the same thing at all. But you watch the TV talk shows, chat shows, or whatever. And it's a constant roster of people who have a thing to promote, and they come on, they've got their 6 minutes, and they talk about the thing, and they tell the funny anecdote that's been teed up, and then they go and do the same thing on all the other shows. And
right.
And I only have to have conversations that I want to have. I either have to love the music that I'm talking about, or or I don't know it, but there's something really interesting about it that makes me want to go and explore it. And other people can say, "Do you want to interview so and so?" And I go, "Not right now, but thanks." And it's really nice because I just get to do what I want to do, and actually that's a really powerful thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's nice that so many people in our community are doing that and valuing, it's to me, like, there are a lot of people making records that if you were looking at it only from a financial perspective wouldn't be made. And I'm not particularly interested in records that are made with only that perspective. And I'm glad that people are so committed to doing it that that's not the only calculation.
Yeah, and I think, when we sort of started this conversation, you're talking about Hawktail and, how it's possible to make these profoundly beautiful instrumental quiet records that are meant for sitting and listening to. And I totally believe that. I think it's some of the most interesting stuff that is being made exists in that space. And it's funny, that journey that, you sort of look back to the Grisman Quintet through Telluride Sessions and Skip Hop and Wobble and Edgar's record. Like, Edgar's records for Sony Classical are a similar sort of thing, but made by like a major label with budget and like that. You just can't see that kind of thing happening now. But there's something beautiful about all of that music, whether it was made with a big budget or people just went, look, we have to do this. We have to get this out of our systems because it's going to be bugging us for the rest of our lives if we don't.
Totally. Yeah. That was sort of the nature of, we were in England with Grant and Alex Hargraves and Greg Garrison, and we played a set there at the Sore Fingers camp. And it was one of those things, like, we all just felt like, it was a unique experience. We were all kind of pushing in the same direction, is like the way I like to say it, without having even talked about it. And we just kind of wanted to honor that. And that was the reason we made that record, the Bluegrass and the Abstract Truth. And if from another perspective, like, let's say you write a tune and you think it's a good tune, or you write a song that's you're like, this might have legs. You kind of want to put it towards a project that you're going to tour. And you don't want to, like, put your A material off on stuff that will never be played live, but that's okay. I mean, it just was one of those things where you're like, let's honor the fact that we had a connection in this way. And then you guys go off and do your things and we'll do ours, and etc.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing how many string bands, bluegrass bands, whatever, over the years have kind of come about through a jam at a festival or a sitting and playing and go, oh, hang on a minute, there's something going on here. We should explore this a bit more. It often seems to often be how it happens.
Totally.
And you talked kind of about this kind of music as being concert music. And I mean, that's the interesting, I think, maybe the distinction is that that's what bluegrass brought in a way. Like, old time music was meant to be danced to, and bluegrass gradually moved towards being more of a concert setting thing. But then certainly instrumental progressive string band music is, a kind of another level of that as well. There's something fascinating about how people interact with music once you take the voice out of it. Because on one hand, what a voice does, I know that's the wrong way of saying it. You're not taking the voice out. You're just not putting one in the first place. Just kind of, I got that wrong there. But the sense that one thing a voice does is that it clearly signposts the structure of a song, because when you're in the verse, when you're in the chorus. Like, sure. It makes it, from a listening point of view, very straightforward. And it also gives you some words, so they're sort of telling you what the music is about at the same time. And there's something about not having that A, lets you go anywhere, leaves some space for the listener to be in it and decide what it means. But there's also, there's also an odd tension between particularly quiet acoustic instrumental music, between that sort of background soundtrack thing and also you can sit with your best headphones on and get completely immersed in just listening to it. And there's an odd tension there sometimes, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. I think so. And I mean, again, I'm really aware that, like, this thing that's happening in our moment is more and more and shorter, shorter attention spans, quicker payoff. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to join TikTok, and I don't want to do all that stuff. I feel like I want to try and do the thing that like the long form journalism. I like that. I like reading. I like being able to hang out with an article for 20 pages, and I like the musical equivalent of that. And to me, like, I don't like it when I have music that's like making everything explicit. Like, there's no room for doubt. about what's happening. I like music that has believes their listener, is sentient, and can follow along a train of thought.
Yeah. Well, and there's that sort of word space comes into play in many ways here, because there's something I love about. I guess it's something I like about string band music in the same way that I listen to a string quartet. Is you can hear individual voices within it, and particularly when you're, whether the listener is aware of this or not, but when your intent is to create something conversational, you need to hear what everybody's doing. Otherwise, it's not a conversation.
I think that's right, and I think like you think about like a fiddle tune. Like let's say we were playing Whiskey Before Breakfast, and if you're a student of, or if you're telling somebody learn Whiskey Before Breakfast, you want to show them a version where the notes don't ever change. The A part, when you repeat it, is the same. And then you come around, but that's not how we play it. And the way it's played, even if by somebody who's not really changing it very much, it's still going to change the emphasis, maybe even 1/8 note or just leaving out an eighth note. And those little changes, I think, even when we're not conscious of them, sustain our interest, I think. And I think when they don't happen, at least my experience is to just be like, okay, I'm finding myself checking out.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that fascinated me when I first started trying to play bluegrass kind of with some intent and learning fiddle tunes and going, well, hang on a minute. How does Whiskey Before Breakfast go? How does it actually go?
Right.
What's the actual tune? Because all these people who are very successful bluegrass musicians all play entirely differently. So how am I supposed to know? Like, there's no book you can buy that tells you this is the true Whiskey Before Breakfast.
Isn't that funny that at some point you realize there isn't, like, obviously if somebody Greer wrote a tune, you can say that's what Greer played and that's a tune. But with many of these tunes, there isn't an actual quote unquote version of it, and the definition of the tune is the thing that is in common between all of them, and it's a more reduced and abstracted version.
Yeah, and like with jazz, you go to a gig and people haven't necessarily agreed what they're going to play. People will get their iPads out and kind of get the chart out, and people just don't do that in the bluegrass sense. And it's the sort of funny irony that the biggest joy of bluegrass is that wherever you go in the world, if you know the repertoire, you can all play Whiskey Before Breakfast together, but you're all going to be playing a slightly different version of it. Yeah, which is brilliant. It's the beautiful thing about it, I think.
Absolutely, it's totally great, and I anticipate that I will play Whiskey Before Breakfast until whenever I'm done with life, and I will try and find something new to do with it every day, and that's sustains my interest.
It's funny that it's the thing we were talking about earlier about the kind of the point that you realise the things that don't make you quite sound the way you think you ought to are the things that you should lean into because they're the things that are you. And I used to play guitar in a band in the 90s, and I used to really beat myself up because I couldn't work if I was lazy or if I was just not good or what, but I would never, ever 100% have a guitar part for a song that we did. There'd always be, I would always leave, I'd always intentionally leave something unfinished. And I used to think that it was that I just wasn't disciplined enough to really do the last 5% of work that's really important. And I realized I was just leaving space in there because I hate playing the same thing every time.
Yeah.
I just leave places where I just go, these are the chords in this place, but I'll play them how I feel today.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it's funny how your perceptions of what you're doing when you make music can change as you go through life and experience things and have some more conversations and hear other people do things and,
Yeah. And like whether it's, let's say Frizzell or Andrew Marlin, I think those are two people who are making musical choices that not everybody would be comfortable with, but they're very comfortable with them, and that's what makes it work, I think. And they're not conveying a sense of unease. They're conveying a sense of ease, actually, with their choices.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? That thing of you can find somebody's choices strange, but at the same time totally trust them. Like I guess that's my prime example of this is always Chris Thile, in that he'll put a record out and he'll go somewhere entirely different from where he's been before. But you kind of go, well, if he's going there, I'm going to trust him. It's worth getting on the bus and going to see what's over there because he wouldn't be doing it otherwise. And he's been right so many times before.
Right. Yeah. and if your audience has faith that it's going to be okay and they're not going to be uncomfortable for you later, then you have a lot of options.
It's been a really interesting conversation because normally when I talk about somebody's new record, we talk about the record and the songs and the names of stuff much more than this. Yeah. But I love a conversation about sort of more the kind of why than the what and the how. But I would love to call out one track, which is Palmer, which from the minute I started listening to these two records, just sort of it felt like meeting an old friend that I'd forgotten existed. It's you know how a song can do that to you. Just you go, I know this. Sure. I don't know this, but I know this. This has always been with me in some form.
That's cool. I feel like a lot of what we're looking for, I mean, like we all have our own different a definition of how close we want this to be, but I think we're looking for new experiences, but ones that feel familiar as well. I think you could see that happening in food or lots of different examples. But I feel like that with music is how do we have both of those things going on at the same time?
And where we are as people and as a society can sometimes dictate how much familiarity we want, because sometimes we need a bit of like a hug from art, and sometimes we need it to poke us in the ear and tell us to get up and go move. And I guess it's that thing of, in the 70s there was so much 50s throwback TV, like Happy Days and Little House on the Prairie, and kind of feel good things to ease us through tricky times. But yeah,
totally.
And I think that's what music does at its best, is it encourages you out of the place you feel comfortable to a place that you now realize you do feel comfortable.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that's a nice way of saying it.
And I think there's certain kinds of listeners who seek that. People want to put a bit of work into something, I
think that's true. Yeah. I mean, it's so easy to like see something succeeding and say, that's what people care about. But that's a terrible way to approach making music. I think it's a lot, there's audiences for people for music that, I don't know, like people go see Greer play a solo instrumental guitar, and he's of course singing songs now and doing a great job with that, but like just one person playing 6 strings for an evening, and it's a beautiful show. And there's an audience for that, and it's not about a smash bang bluegrass thing. And there's just so many examples of that I think audiences are more open than we sometimes presume.
Yeah, totally. I think there's a quote, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I like it enough that I'm going to believe it's true. Of sort of Ford saying, yeah, I could have asked people what they wanted, but they would have just said they wanted a faster horse. And so we'd never have got the automobile, And it's like, I don't know if that's true, but I think I think it works on many levels.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, from fast horses to slow records, it's been a lovely conversation, this. I've really enjoyed kind of digging into some of the kind of, I guess, what goes behind making a record like this and where it comes from and what the themes are. And just because we have hardly talked about it, I'm just going to reiterate that we're talking about a record called Trust and Love. I'm talking about a record called If Not Now Who, because I haven't mentioned those that many times in this interview. And they are beautiful records. Experience them both. I would encourage people listening to this to kind of treat them as a bit of a kind of a pairing and listen through both of them as an experience, because they are extraordinary records, and the more I sit with them, the more I get out of them. And it's been great getting to chat to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thank you for including me. You have a beautiful thing going here, and it's a service to our wider community, and I appreciate you including me.
Bluegrass Jamalong is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.